In the previous lecture, we have started some of the functions or characteristic of an ecosystem. In the last lecture, we have completed two characteristics or functions of an ecosystem. Now in this lecture, we are going to see another two functions or next functions or characteristic of an ecosystem. So we will come to the third function of an ecosystem, that is nothing but the energy flow. Okay, then what is the energy flow? Energy flow is nothing but the transfer of energy from the organisms of an ecosystem. That means in an ecosystem, in specific ecosystem, whatever the organisms are there, in that organisms, how the energy is going to transfer. The study of that, it is called as energy flow. Now we all know that energy for all the ecosystem, it is provided by one and the only source, it is called as sun. Sun is the only source to provide energy to the each and every ecosystem of this earth. Okay, whatever the radiations are emitting by the sun, from that energy is provided to the every ecosystem. Okay, suppose there is 100% radiations are emitted from the sun. Okay, radiations are there which is emitted from the sun on this earth. Okay, out of that 100%, less than 50% radiations are photosynthetically active radiations. That means whatever the 100% radiations are emitted from the sun, it is not totally used for the photosynthesis. Photosynthesis where the own food production takes place by the plants and the producers or the producer. So for the photosynthesis, radiations must be there. These are called as photosynthetically active radiations. And out of 100%, less than 50% is the photosynthetically active radiations. Okay, now this only less than 50% is available for the photosynthesis. Okay, so photosynthesis is done by the producers, that means plants and some of the phytoplanktons. Okay, these are called as producers. So out of that less than 50%, only 2 to 10% of the radiations are captured by the plants or phytoplanktons, that is producers. Think of that, only 100% radiations are emitted. Out of that, less than 50% is photosynthetically active radiations, and out of that available radiations, only 2 to 10% radiations are captured by the plants and phytoplanktons. And whatever plants capturing, only that energy it is transferred into the ecosystem, because only producers can make their own food material. So out of that 100% energy, only 2 to 10% energy it is utilized or it is transferred in the ecosystem. So only 2 to 10% of energy is available to the ecosystem for the energy flow. Remember that. Okay. Now, why producers are first? Because it is the only source, it is the first source of energy in an ecosystem. Okay, we are going to see all the components of an ecosystem. It is the first component of an ecosystem, because source is the sun, but from the sun, who is going to capture the energy? That are nothing but the producers. Okay, so this is about the energy source, that is the sun. Emission of the radiations are there. From that, photosynthetically active 2 to 10% of energy it is captured by the plants. Okay, and now then from the plants it is going to transfer to the each and every organism of an ecosystem. So there is an importance to study how the energy is transferred from organism to organism in an ecosystem and what are their percentages up to the last organism in an ecosystem. So that study is called as the energy flow of an ecosystem. Okay, always remember students that the energy flow is always unidirectional. That means unidirectional means it is transferred from only one direction. That is nothing but direction is in front of you. From the sun it is going to the plants, from the plants it is going to animals, animals again another animals, and it is in the ecosystem. Okay, so it is only one directional. Not energy cannot be transferred reversely. That means from the tertiary consumers to the secondary, secondary to primary, primary to producers, and from producers to the sun. Is it possible the energy is transferred from plants to the sun? No. So reverse transfer of energy does not take place. The energy flow is always a unidirectional, and in every ecosystem the energy is used only once. That means the radiations captured by the sun, it is captured by the plants, then plants to the animals, animals to the another secondary tertiary animals, consumers, and finally it is evolved or it is in the ecosystem. It is not again used by the sun or not again used by the plant. So energy is once used in an ecosystem and it is heated from the ecosystem. So this is very important. So we are going to study how the energy is captured, transferred in an ecosystem, and what is the percentage of an energy in the ecosystem. So during this study, energy flow, it is important to see the transfer of energy in organisms. Always remember the energy flow is always and unidirectional. Only source of energy, first source of energy is the sun, and out of that less than 50% is photosynthetically active. From that 2 to 10% is captured by plants and it is transferred to the another organism. While studying about the energy flow or ecological pyramid or energy flow, we have to remember that there are some of the components of that ecosystem, and that components are very much important to study about the ecosystem. So when we are studying about the energy flow, we must study about the ecological pyramids that we are going to study later. But what are the components of an ecosystem or of an ecological pyramid? So there are majorly two components of an ecosystem. One is the producer and second one is the consumer. Okay, first we will see the producer. Producer means what? The animals or the organisms which can produce their own food material, these are called as producers. Now the organisms which can produce their own food material, they are also called as autotrophs. So we can conclude that autotrophs are nothing but the producers. Now what are the autotrophs? Plants, phytoplanktons are nothing but the autotrophs. So producers are nothing but the plants and phytoplanktons. Okay, now producers are very much important because it is the first source of energy in an ecosystem. Coming to the second part, that is nothing but the consumers. Now consumers are the organisms which cannot produce their own food material but dependent on the another organisms for their food and energy. And such organisms we are calling them as heterotrophs. So consumers are nothing but the heterotrophs. So all the animals, okay, there are some animals which are dependent on the plants for their food and energy, and there are some of the animals which are dependent on another animals for their food and energy. So all these are called as consumers. But in the consumers there are again sub parts are there in the consumers. These are called as primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. That means in the consumers there are different levels are there. So first we will see the primary consumer. Primary consumer means what? The organisms which dependent or which get energy from the producers. These are called as primary consumers. They are also called as herbivores because they feeds on the producers that are nothing but the plants and phytoplankton. So they are called as herbivores or also called as primary consumers. Then coming to the next, that is secondary consumers. Secondary consumers are nothing but the organisms which dependent on primary consumers for their food and energy. These are called as secondary consumers, or they are also called as carnivores because they are feeding on the another animals. So they can be called as secondary consumers or carnivores. Okay. Then tertiary consumers. Tertiary consumers are nothing but the organisms which are dependent on secondary consumers for their food and energy. Okay, so they are called as top level consumers or top carnivores we can call. So these are some of the levels of a consumers, and producers and consumers are the major components of an ecosystem by which we can study the entire ecosystem and energy transfer in the ecosystem. So energy flow, within that we have seen the source of energy, then how much energy is transferred into plants, then how it is the important to study about the transfer of energy. Then we have seen two of the major components of an ecosystem, that is producers and consumers, the subtypes of the consumers. Okay, there are again some of the important components we will see in the next lecture.